Coming up on our newscast tonight. Kim Jong-un extends an invitation for talks to his U.S. counterpart. President Trump responds with not just a yes, but goes a step further and sets a date for the first ever U.S. North Korea summit. PyeongChang raises the curtain once again to roll out the carpet and welcome athletes from all over the world participating in this year's Winter Paralympics. The 10-day global event begins with an exciting opening ceremony at the Alpine City's Olympic Plaza. South Korea is not exempt from Washington's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Various response measures are being implemented and formulated by Seoul as the trend could lead to additional regulations. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome. I'm Daniel Cha. We start with some Olympic action here. The PyeongChang Winter Paralympic Games begins with the opening ceremony tonight. Our Won Jung-hwan is standing by at the Olympic Plaza in the Alpine City. Jung-hwan, once again, the atmosphere must be electrifying over there.
Hi, Daniel. The 2018 PyeongChang Paralympics has just kicked off with the grand opening ceremony at the Olympic Plaza. And let's have a hear of those people who have long waited for the opening ceremony.
So, our volunteers and us, the PyeongChang Olympic Committee staff prepared a lot for the spectators. So, as you know, Olympic opening ceremony and closing ceremony is very well done, I think, and very successful. So I hope also the Paralympic festival, the opening ceremony, will give all the spectators to enjoy all the things and events and festivals.
We've been in Korea now for 2 days, and the Koreans have been so impressive in every way. Their ingenuity and their focus on detail has struck me at each and every point. And I'm talking about everything from magnificence to safety. So I expect all of that to come through in the opening ceremony.
And besides the atmosphere, the weather over here at PyeongChang has improved in time for the opening ceremony. Even in the afternoon today, there was still some snow, but fortunately it has stopped now. So the ceremony should be dry, clear, and not that cold for the 35,000 spectators inside the stadium.
Right, Jung-hwan, tell us more about the opening ceremony itself. What's the highlight of the event?
Yes, Daniel, the opening ceremony of the 2018 PyeongChang Paralympics will be all about the demonstration of the key 4 values of Paralympics, which will be determination, inspiration, courage, and equality. The 2-hour opening ceremony will be conducted by Lee Moon-tae, the president of the Korean Traditional Performing Art Foundation, and he said there will be some elements that symbolize peaceful coexistence between able-bodied people and those with disabilities. And Grammy Award-winning soprano Jo Soo-mi will also perform at the opening ceremony. She will sing Here as One, the theme tune of the Paralympics, which highlights once again that this is a place of unity and companionship that overcomes barriers. And the organizers have said there will be a particularly touching finale to the 8-day Paralympic torch relay that involved 800 torch bearers when the final torch bearer goes to light the Paralympic flame.
Sounds pretty exciting, but when it comes to the athletes' entrance, Jung-hwan, I understand there won't be a repeat of the historic moment last month when delegations of the 2 Koreas marched together under the unification flag.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to see the joint march this time as the 2 Koreas have decided to change things up for tonight's opening ceremony. Yesterday, officials from the 2 Koreas met to discuss the details of the joint parade, but they couldn't agree on whether Dokdo, Korea's eastmost island, should appear on the unification flag. The issue between the 2 Koreas eventually led to the decision for them to march in separately. But Daniel, despite the decision, the Korea Paralympic Committee has proposed that representative of the South and the North carry the Paralympic torch together for the relay, as North Korea is making its Winter Paralympic debut.
All right, Joanne, we hope you have fun.
That's all from me. Back to you, Daniel.
Right, John, we hope you have fun witnessing the moment there for us. We know that the Korean organizers constantly up the ante, and they'll continue to do the same this time again. Thanks, we appreciate it. Paralympians will be competing in a total of 6 sporting events, including alpine skiing, biathlon, and wheelchair curling. The basic rules are similar, but slightly different to that of the Olympics. Lee Ji-won explains further.
Alpine skiing, biathlon, ice hockey. These games might sound familiar, but at the Paralympics, they're a little bit different. For the Paralympics ice hockey, the athletes use sleds and they have 2 short sticks instead of 1 long one. Wheelchair curlers also use a special stick so they can easily and accurately push the stones from their wheelchairs, while a teammate helps keep the wheelchair stable. In Paralympics curling, there aren't any sweepers, which makes the delivery even more important. But there are some disciplines with much bigger differences in the equipment and events. The alpine skiing, biathlon, and cross-country skiing have 3 classifications of games: standing, sitting, and visually impaired. Standing skiing is for athletes with impairments in their arms or legs or even both. Sitting skiing is for those with lower limb impairment. Sit skiers use a ski that has a chair built on top and use outriggers, special forearm crutches with small skis on the end, to help keep their balance. But the biggest differences can be seen in the races for the visually impaired skiers. These skiers compete in pairs with a guide who skis ahead of the athletes and gives verbal cues through a headset to become the eyes of the Paralympic athlete. A special aid is also essential for the visually impaired biathlon athletes. After skiing with their guides, they use specially designed electronic rifles, which use sound to help the athletes aim at the targets. The closer the aim is to the target, the louder the beeping sound will ring in their headsets. But simply finishing the race first doesn't guarantee a gold medal in the Paralympic skiing events. Results are calculated based on the degree of an athlete's disability so that skiers with different impairments can compete on the same level and get a fair result. 이지원, 아리랑 뉴스.
A most welcome development in the ongoing efforts to bring about peace on the Korean Peninsula. The leaders of Pyongyang and Washington will be holding a historic summit in May if all things work out. Moon Geun-young has more on the announcement made by Seoul's national security chief upon President Trump's request.
One historic breakthrough after another. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has invited President Trump to meet for negotiations over its nuclear program, and U.S. President Donald Trump has not only accepted but said, let's do it by May. The stunning announcement was made by South Korean President Moon Jae-in's national security advisor, Chung Eui-yong, in Washington to discuss the outcome of a rare visit to Pyongyang by Seoul's presidential envoys earlier this week.
He expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization.
The U.S. president's acceptance came after the South Korean official relayed Kim's pledge to refrain from further nuclear tests and move toward denuclearization.
I told President Trump that in our meeting, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said he is committed to denuclearization. Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests. He understands that the routine joint military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the United States must continue.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders confirmed the news, saying Mr. Trump would accept the invitation to meet Mr. Kim at a place and time to be determined. That was almost immediately followed by a tweet by President Donald Trump. He said North Korea's Kim Jong-un had talked about denuclearization with the South Korean representatives, not just a freeze, that a meeting is being planned, but sanctions would remain in place for the time being. The meeting, if it does take place, would make Trump the first sitting U.S. president to meet with his North Korean counterpart, a stunning diplomatic breakthrough with uncertain consequences. Speaking at the pre-opening ceremony of the PyeongChang Winter Paralympics Friday evening, South Korean President Moon Jae-in spoke of hope, cautiously expressing optimism.
남북은 4월 말 남북 정상회담을 개최하기로 했고 오늘 트럼프 대통령은 5월 안에 김정은 위원장을 만나겠다고 약속했습니다. 한반도의 비핵화와 평화는 현실이 되어가고 있습니다.
Experts in South Korea and the U.S. say the never-before-seen level of speed and development in Seoul, Washington, Pyongyang ties can largely be credited to the type of leaderships in place in all three states. Regarding today's decision, a senior U.S. official said that it made sense to accept the invite to meet the one person who can actually make the decisions instead of continuing with the long slog of the past, a sentiment shared by South Korean President Moon Jae-in. 문건영, Arirang News, the Blue House.
The nation's top office is busy gearing up for the first inter-Korean summit in over a decade, set to take place at the border village of Panmunjom in late April. According to the Cheongwade spokesperson, President Moon signed an order to create a preparatory committee for that meeting.
President Moon has appointed his Chief of Staff Im Jong-seok as the chair of the preparatory committee for inter-Korean summit. The committee's key mission is to make sure substantial agreements are produced once they'll drive development of inter-Korean ties at the summit in April. Members of this committee will take part in the high-level meetings with North Korea to set up the latest summit.
Im is one of a handful of key players that the liberal leader is banking on to rebuild inter-Korean ties strained for nearly a decade. The 51-year-old chief of staff played a pivotal role in the latest detente with the regime fostered by the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. But 30 years ago, as a prominent democracy activist, he was imprisoned for 3.5 years for violating national security laws by orchestrating an unauthorized visit to North Korea with a fellow student who also served jail time. The nation's top office gave the local media a play-by-play of how the envoys secured the unexpected big announcement from the White House. Hwang Ho-jun takes us behind the scenes.
As a matter of fact, Chung Eui-yong and Seo-hoon, the special envoys to the U.S., were not initially scheduled to meet with President Trump on Thursday. According to the Blue House, Chung and Seo first held separate one-on-one meetings with U.S. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster and CIA Deputy Director Gina Haspel, respectively, for half an hour starting at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Then, at 3:30, they got together with other U.S. government officials, including U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis and Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats. However, in the middle of the briefing of some 20 officials, they received word that President Trump wanted an audience with them as soon as possible. Chung and Seo had originally been scheduled to meet with President Trump on Friday. So, initially, what was meant to be an hour-long meeting ended after about 45 minutes, and Chung Eui-yong and Seo-hoon headed to the Oval Office to meet with President Trump at 4:15. A dozen White House officials, including U.S. Vice President Mike Pence and Chief of Staff John Kelly, were also present, along with McMaster, Mattis, and Haspel. Chung first thanked the U.S. president. He then delivered President Moon's gratitude for Trump's support for the progress made with North Korea and said the special envoy's visit was primarily meant to convey South Korea's desire for Seoul and Washington to move forward in total cooperation. Recounting his visit to Pyongyang, Chung said Kim Jong-un seemed genuine and sincere. And while he noted that past mistakes should not be repeated, Chung stressed that he hopes the U.S. can trust the envoy's judgment of Kim and seize the opportunity to resume dialogue with the North Korean leader. He mentioned that Kim wants to meet with Trump as soon as possible. President Trump hailed South Korea's efforts and accepted the proposal for a summit meeting and asked the South Korean envoys if it could be held in April. But Chung reminded Trump that the inter-Korean summit will take place in April and suggested that he and Kim Jong-un meet once that's over. Then the unexpected happened. President Moon asked Chung to make a surprise announcement at the White House about the outcome of the 45-minute discussion. And so for the next 2 hours, the special envoys wrote up a statement in cooperation with U.S. National Security Council personnel at the White House. They reported that turn of events to President Moon via a secured phone line, and the historic announcement was made shortly after 7 p.m. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
So, what are the next steps to take on the part of both Pyongyang and Washington before sitting down for talks in May? Kim Young-gil zooms in on the build-up to the game-changer of a summit.
Following the unexpected announcement this morning that U.S. President Trump accepted to hold a summit meeting with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, the stakes are very high now for Pyongyang and Washington, as both sides will have to strive to maintain the momentum until May and find a diplomatic solution to the issue of denuclearizing North Korea.
The closed-door negotiations that the U.S. and North Korea will most likely pursue are expected to include sharing of respective agendas and mending differences before the proposed May summit.
However, a North Korean expert said that closed-door talks will not be easy to pull off, as Pyongyang would have to show in a concrete and resolute manner that it is willing to give up its nuclear arsenal.
North Korea and the U.S. must agree on two things: permanent denuclearization and guaranteed security for North Korea. So the summit will aim not at denuclearizing North Korea in stages, but at ending the regime's nuclear program for good.
The expert also said that the Trump administration's tough rhetoric and stricter sanctions against North Korea have brought Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table. If previous reactions were belligerent and bombastic, this time around Pyongyang will have to opt for a cautious and sensible attitude, as the possibility of a military retaliation has already been brought up by Trump. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
From North Korea deciding to participate in the Winter Olympics to Washington announcing possible talks with Pyongyang, Oh Jung-hee helps us look back at the long journey for Seoul and President Moon, mediating the two sides that seem to drift further and further apart.
It all began when North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, on the very first day of 2018, expressed his openness to improving inter-Korean ties and hinted at the possibility of Pyongyang participating in the Winter Olympics. South Korea was quick to grab the olive branch. Upon Seoul's suggestion, the two Koreas held high-level talks at the truce village of Panmunjom for the first time in 3 years. For the Olympics, the North agreed to send athletes, a high-level delegation, art troops, and more. The inter-Korean military communication line was restored, along with the hotline at the border village. South Korean President Moon Jae-in dubbed the PyeongChang Winter Olympics the Peace Olympics, with North Korea's participation confirmed and joint military drills by Seoul and Washington postponed until after the Games. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula were further reduced as Kim Jong-un's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, invited President Moon over to Pyongyang on behalf of her brother. But for South Korea, it was crucial to have things go at the right pace for the U.S. too. Washington remained wary of Pyongyang's actions, calling them a charm offensive, and announced a new set of sanctions on the regime. South Korea's intelligence authorities served as mediators between Washington and Pyongyang, delivering messages between the two. And on Friday, South Korea's efforts to keep the momentum going proved successful when the U.S. agreed to holding a historic first summit with North Korea by May. Attending a reception event for the Paralympics on Friday, President Moon Jae-in recalled the situation on the Korean Peninsula back in October.
당시만 해도 한반도 정세는 꽁꽁 얼어붙어 있었습니다. 평화를 기대하는 것이 무모해 보이기도 했습니다.
But now, as relations with North Korea continue to thaw, he wished for the success of the Paralympics and for that to lead to peace on the Korean Peninsula.
평창 동계올림픽에서 시작된 화합의 물줄기가 패럴림픽을 통해 더 큰 화합의 강이 되고 한반도 평화와 번영의 바다로 이어지도록 계속 성원해 주시기 바랍니다.
오정희, 아리랑 뉴스.
Some argue the seemingly sudden diplomatic development is the inevitable result of strong sanctions and pressure. Others warn Pyongyang's latest moves could just be an attempt to buy time. Kwon Jang-ho turned to some experts for their views on the developments.
Just over 3 months ago, talks of a potential meeting between the leaders of the U.S. and North Korea would have sounded like a pipe dream. But the speed in which the situation has developed has caught everyone off guard. The question on everyone's mind has been why. The general consensus is that international sanctions led by the U.S. have been biting and that North Korea are looking to ease the pressure.
What we can be sure of is that it has been the effect of the sanctions and pressure. The situation in North Korea is currently very serious, and they need to deal with the pressure and sanctions somehow.
However, the speed in which Pyongyang has opened up has raised questions over its intentions. There are concerns already that the regime is just stalling in the face of sanctions.
Many people believe that North Korea will not give up its nuclear weapons. So this agreement to have a summit meeting between the United States and North Korea would provide some time to North Korea to complete its nuclear capabilities.
In the meantime, there's also been surprise over how quickly the White House agreed to Pyongyang's invitation, especially after the war of words between President Trump and Kim Jong-un over the last year. But despite Trump's rhetoric, the administration's party line had always been to keep all options open, including dialogue, with North Korea halting nuclear and missile testing and suggesting that they could discuss denuclearization. Washington had little to lose from agreeing to talks.
I think it's important to keep in mind that the U.S. has always maintained a policy of maximum pressure and engagement. So to some extent, I think the U.S. was obligated in many ways to follow through on its original policy statement about how to engage with the North.
However, experts also point to the role that South Korea had in reaching this point, and that Seoul's involvement, especially during the Olympics, has contributed to the possible dialogue.
Trump's pressure and sanctions campaign did have an effect, but the deciding factor that acted as a mediator between the U.S. and North Korea and alleviated their mistrust was South Korea.
Kwon Arirang News.
There have been interactions and meetings between representatives from Washington and Pyongyang in the past, but nothing like what we're about to witness in May. Cha Sang-mi helps illustrate why the upcoming summit marks a significant step forward.
October 21, 1994. Under an agreed framework signed between the United States and North Korea in Geneva, Pyongyang froze its nuclear power plants, and the U.S. agreed to replace them with light water reactors. The Clinton administration pushed for the normalization of U.S. North Korea relations until the treaty ultimately broke down in 2002. September 19, 2005. Multilateral discussions are held in Beijing involving South Korea, North Korea, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia. The six-party talks seem to have reached some consensus on North Korea abandoning its nuclear programs, and the North pledged to return to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the pact didn't last long. North Korea tested its first nuclear weapon in October the next year, and then the U.S. took action against China's Banco Delta Asia, a Macau-based bank that was a primary money laundering concern at the time. Further six-party talks were held in 2007, and a deal was implemented in October. The parties agreed to provide a total of 1 million tons of heavy fuel oil in exchange for the North committing to the pact. The following year, North Korea demolished a 20-meter-tall cooling tower at its nuclear reactor complex to symbolize its commitment. But the talks have not been held since 2009, when North Korea detonated a nuclear weapon underground. The most recent official meeting between the United States and North Korea was on February 29, 2012, in Beijing. Those were the first high-level talks between the two countries since Kim Jong-un came to power. The Obama administration urged the regime to suspend its nuclear activities in exchange for some 240,000 metric tons of food aid. But again, the North didn't keep its promise and tested a third nuclear device in 2014. 6 years after the last meeting, an unprecedented encounter is about to happen between a sitting U.S. president and a North Korean leader. Come May, if there's to be a new commitment, it will have to be reached by two leaders who've both been unpredictable in their own ways. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
The diplomatic breakthrough immediately made headlines the world over. Kim Mo-kyun sheds light on how media outlets in various countries covered the surprising turnaround.
China responded positively to the prospect of a North Korea-U.S. summit in May. Beijing's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Friday that China welcomes the positive message that North Korea and the U.S. are sending out on their planned talks.
The solution to the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula is to keep marching in the correct direction. China offers full approval and support to the relevant sides, committing to resolving the issue via talks.
China's state-run Hwanqiu Sibao and Xinhua News Agency stressed on the fact that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un extended his hand first, which Trump accepted. Meanwhile, Japan responded in a more sensitive way. NHK reported that U.S. President Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe agreed to hold summit talks in Washington on the North Korea issue. The reports also said that Abe emphasized the need for the international community to keep sanctions against North Korea in place until the regime makes irreversible steps towards denuclearization. Russia also responded positively. Moscow's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that he believes that the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Trump is a step towards the right direction.
First of all, we believe that this is a step in the right direction. This is the first day we've heard of this agreement, and that this meeting is going to take place to normalize the tension on the Korean Peninsula.
He also said that it should not just end up as a meeting, but open up the road to find an ultimate solution to the North Korean nuclear issue on the basis of principles agreed during the six-party talks and the UN Security Council. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump inked an executive order imposing tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports. The only exceptions are Canada and Mexico at this point. Lee Jung-in reports on how this move affects Korea.
The die is cast. The U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum that prompted talk of a trade war became official Thursday afternoon. President Trump signed off on the tariffs, but with temporary exemptions for Canada and Mexico, since negotiations on NAFTA are still underway. Not exempt from the tariffs, though, is America's longtime ally, South Korea. The tariff measures are expected to deal a heavy blow to South Korea's steel industry, as it's the third biggest exporter of steel to the U.S. On top of that, experts foresee fiercer competition, as now South Korea will have to compete against other steel exporters trying to find a market outside of the U.S.
China is a strong player, in steel production and export. So we have to make better steels. We have to high quality, steels compared to China. In terms of quality, getting over Japan or Germany, I think that is the fundamental task in Korean industry.
The expert added that the bigger concern is what could come later.
The steel industry itself is fairly, less significant compared to the entire size of Korean economy. But the trouble is, United States is trying to reduce the trade deficit in all other, spectrum of commodities, not just confined to steels.
This means restrictions could eventually be put on other products like semiconductors and electronics. Signing the executive order at the White House, Trump elaborated on the need for the tariff, emphasizing the millions of Americans who lost their jobs due to, quote, unfair trade practices. He also said it's a matter of defending America's national security. And speaking of national security, according to the Blue House, South Korea's national security advisor, Chung Eui-yong, who's now in Washington to debrief President Trump on his visit to North Korea, urged the U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis and U.S. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster to exempt South Korea from the 25% tariff on steel. According to the Blue House, both Mattis and McMaster said they would review the matter favorably. With 15 days to go until the tariffs take effect, eyes are now on how South Korea will respond to minimize the tariff's impact on its economy. Lee Jung-in, Arirang News.
And upon learning South Korea will not be exempt from Washington's latest import tariffs, the nation's trade ministry quickly held a meeting to gauge the potential impact and formulate appropriate responses. Kim Hye-sung shares with us what was discussed.
Korea's trade ministry held an emergency meeting Friday morning to discuss countermeasures to the Trump administration's new tariffs. At the meeting with government officials and local steelmakers, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, Baek Eun-kyu, expressed his regret over Washington's decision. He cited concerns about the possible economic damage to Korean steel exporters and said Seoul will continue to try to persuade Washington to exempt Korea or exclude some items from the tariffs. The Korean government will continue its efforts to reach out to Washington, with Trade Representative Kim Hyun-jong meeting with his U.S. counterpart Robert Lighthizer and other Washington officials to explain Korea's stance. The Trade Ministry said it will look into possibly filing a complaint to the WTO with other steel exporting nations and will appeal to other countries at multilateral forums like the upcoming G20 finance ministers meeting to try to prevent a looming trade war.
Bilateral consultation is key at this point to appeal to Washington that Seoul, its key allies' steel exports do not pose a security threat to the U.S. and to seek exemption within the next 15 days. And also to use the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement renegotiations and possible future economic partnership, like on shale gas projects, as leverage in negotiations.
According to the Hyundai Research Institute, if Trump's 25% steel tariff measures go into effect, South Korean steel companies could see a drop of over 20% of their exports to the U.S., or around $900 million each year. To minimize the impact of the tariffs, Korean local steelmakers said they will contact U.S. steel companies to seek item exemptions and work with the Korean government to increase the steel industry's competitiveness. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
The Me Too movement is sweeping various sectors in the nation and in the political arena. One of the most celebrated figures in the sector turned up at the prosecutor's office for questioning over sexual abuse allegations. After days of silence staying away from the public limelight, Arirang finally speaks up. Kim Min-ji has the details.
Hundreds of reporters gathered at the Seoul Western District Prosecutor's office on Friday after the former governor of Chungcheongnam-do Province, Arirang, accused of sexual assault, announced that he would voluntarily present himself to prosecutors. Before entering the building, the Liberal politician apologized and said he would respond sincerely to the prosecutor's questions.
I apologize to the public and the people in my province. I'm also truly sorry to my wife and children. I will sincerely answer and comply with the investigation.
It was his first public appearance since the scandal surfaced on Monday, and decided cooperating with the investigation and taking legal responsibility is the right way to express his apology to the public. A day earlier, he abruptly called off a highly anticipated press conference, through which he was expected to tell his side of the story regarding allegations he raped his secretary. But in a text message from one of his aides, An said the prosecution's questioning should come first, as that's what the people demand. That's the only official explanation that was given, but circumstances haven't exactly been favorable for him, with the second alleged victim claiming she too had been sexually assaulted several times. An's case has been the first to sprout in Korea's political sphere since the Me Too movement spread across various fields earlier this year. A raft of allegations of sexual misconduct in the entertainment, culture, education, and even religious circles have emerged, with a number of culprits lined up for questioning. But Friday saw a dire consequence. Actor Cho Min-gi, who was also facing accusations of sexually molesting several women, was found dead at a private property. He was found hanged by his wife in an apparent suicide, with police currently investigating the exact cause of death. Although the general mood up until now was to point fingers at abusers and call for justice, Jo's death has certainly left many in shock. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Time for weather updates with our Michelle Bach. Michelle, the opening ceremony for the Paralympics is underway. How's the weather looking down in PyeongChang?
Well, Daniel, it's currently foggy at the stadium, but it's clear enough for the opening ceremony to proceed on schedule. Now, thankfully, it's milder than expected. However, the wind chill will go down to -12 degrees Celsius by midnight. As for the weather conditions for tomorrow, Seoul will wake up to 0 degrees Celsius, Daegu the same, while Busan is at 4 degrees with high levels of fine dust in the western regions. And we are expecting the dust to clear away in the afternoon, Seoul peaking up to 9 degrees. Gwangju and Busan will hit at 13 degrees. And clear skies and warm spring temperatures will continue through next week until the latter half of next week, bringing nationwide rain. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all from us. Thank you for watching. Have an incredible weekend.